It's nothing short of breathtaking to see what is going on in the world around us in real time. This past Shabbos, we read the Torah portion, 3,338 years old. It's a commandment, a biblical commandment, to wipe out the nation of Amalek, the nemesis of the Jewish people, the people who are avowed to destroying the Jewish people. And as we read the story, news was breaking as synagogues around the world were reading this portion. The rumor was spreading that Israel and America had attacked Iran. What was going to be? Who was going to be winning? What was going on? We couldn't tell, but we announced on Shabbos, we couldn't use the electricity. We couldn't use the telephones. We announced and we said, look, all we can do is look into the Torah. The Torah is the blueprint of creation. From the Torah, God brings the blessings to the whole world. All the answers are in the Torah. And if the Torah tells us that we have to wipe out and obliterate the memory of our nemesis, then that's exactly what's going to be within hours. It was extraordinary to witness, to hear how the Ayatollah himself, Ayatollah Khamenei, was assassinated, was executed by the attacks from American and Israeli military. Thank God it was incredibly timed in the days just leading up to Purim. This portion of Zachor, to remember, to never forget, to wipe out the memory of those who are trying to destroy us, is read in the days leading up to Purim. Purim is when we commemorate the Jewish victory over Haman. Haman is a descendant of that nation of Amalek, who tried to wipe out the Jewish people. And it's no coincidence that Khamenei, Ayatollah Khamenei's name sounds like Haman, Khamenei. When you spell his name with a Haman, you realize that he is the modern day Haman. But there are extraordinary lessons for us to extract from the story as we read the Megillah on this year's Purim. We will be blessing God for having given us miracles in those days by Yomim Haim, and in these days, Bizman Hazeh, like never before. This year's Purim is going to be observed, and not in the past, but in the present tense. There is no word for history in Hebrew, because we do not believe in celebrating events that are relevant only to the ancient past. We celebrate events in the real time, in the present moment, and that's exactly what's going to be happening this year in Purim. When we learn the lessons of Purim, of how the nation of Persia, of Iran, tried to wipe out the Jewish people, God forbid, in one single day. Haman solicited the king Achashverosh. Haman was the Grand Vizier. He was the prime minister, assistant second to the king. He convinced King Achashverosh to allow him to assassinate, to destroy all the Jewish people in one single day, God forbid. Haman planned to do this not using armies, but using civilians. He was going to empower civilians to allow them to execute all Jewish neighbors in one single day, men, women, and children, and to incentivize them by granting them the property of the Jews that they would execute in one single day. Not even Hitler, may his name be blotted out and erased, was able to think up such a evil plan. Remember, King Ahasuerus ruled over the entire known world, from Ethiopia all the way to India, 127 countries. There was nowhere for the Jews to escape to. Miraculously, though, through the leadership of Mordechai and Queen Esther, the Jewish people were able to solicit the king and to transform the Iranian decree of Holocaust, of genocide over the Jews, into the opposite, where the Jews were able to, in fact, to destroy, to murder, to kill those who were trying to, in fact, kill them. And that is what we're celebrating on Purim. Purim happened 2,200 years ago, approximately, and it's being repeated today in 2026. Let's take a look at some of the lessons that Purim can teach us from way back then of how we can approach today. You see, the Talmud asks a question. The oral Torah asks, why were the Jews worthy of such a terrible decree of attempted genocide? Purim is when we came to the precipice of extinction. We were on the brink of total annihilation, God forbid. And it was at the 11th hour that Queen Esther was able to solicit the king, Ahasuerus, to reverse the decree and allow the Jews, in fact, to defend themselves and to execute those who tried to destroy the Jews. The Talmud asks, why were the Jews worthy of such a terrible punishment? And the Talmud answers that it's because they enjoyed the feast of King Ahasuerus. At the beginning of the Megillah, we start off with a story of where King Ahasuerus celebrates a wild feast in which he celebrates with his people for 187 days. 187 days of celebration. What he really was celebrating was the non-fulfillment of the prophecy of Jeremiah. You see, when the Jewish people's temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, nearly 70 years prior, Jeremiah the prophet made a prophecy. He said that the destruction of Jerusalem would last only 70 years. And after 70 years, it would be rebuilt. According to his miscalculation, King Ahasuerus calculated that those 70 years had come and passed. And therefore he threw a feast. And it was at that party that the Jewish people came to celebrate. Can you imagine? A party that celebrates the death of the Jewish God. Why would the Jewish people be attending? The reason they attended is because they felt that they no longer needed the support of God Almighty if they had the support of their political leaders. If they had the support of the monarch, of King Ahasuerus, the king of the known world, they'd be fine, they'd be safe, they'd be protected. And what we learn from the story of Purim is that when the Jews turn their backs on God, then God does the same. He turns his back on the Jews. That's what the Talmud means when the Talmud says that the reason why they were worthy of the death penalty of this genocidal decree is because they had enjoyed the feast of King Ahasuerus. They had allowed this King Ahasuerus to celebrate with them. Even though he was celebrating the death of the Jewish God, they didn't care. They couldn't care about the Jewish God because they felt that their defenses, all of the protections that they needed, were with their elected officials. And we can do exactly the same mistake today. If you put your trust in President Trump or in Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu or in the IDF or in the Israeli Air Force or in the Mossad or in the CIA or the FBI or some other political power, then we are doing exactly the same mistake as the Jews did back then. The turning point of the Purim story was the fast that Esther decreed upon the Jewish people on that fateful day, on the day when the war was supposed to take place, when the anti-Semites were supposed to attack the Jews, according to Haman's original decree. Esther decrees a fast, and she asks the Jewish people to realign their priorities, to reorient their own spiritual values, to move away from their political allegiances, and to realign themselves with their commitment to God Almighty. And when they made that fast, the fast of Esther, which is in the hours leading up to the festival of Purim, the Jews turned back to face God, and God reciprocates in kind. When we turn back to face God, then God turns back to face us. And that is what allowed us to come to the miracle of Purim, which was the salvation of the Jewish people, even though they were holding at the brink of extinction. We can do exactly the same thing today as well. We cannot rely on the IDF or the Israeli Air Force or the great, powerful aircraft carriers of the United States, the F-22s and the F-35s and the B-22s or the B-2 bombers. We can't rely on those machines. We can only rely on God Almighty. Because today in 2026, when we take a moment to actually fast on the hours before Purim, when we take a moment to realign our values, to reorient our spiritual priorities, to say, I don't trust in horses and chariots and in armor and in weapons and in budgets and in superpowers. I trust only in God Almighty and God above. It's when we take this time to fast on the day leading to the day of Purim, which is this year on Monday, March 2nd. When we do that, when we fast from dawn until nightfall, it's then that we're behaving just like the Jews behaved in the Purim story 2,200 years ago. And we too will be able to bring upon ourselves the same miracles, the same salvation, the same extraordinary redemption that our ancestors experienced then. You know, the Iranians, you never really know what they're up to. They're very deceptive, like used car salesmen or maybe snake oil salesmen. Could they have some terrible nuclear surprise? You never know. We cannot trust in our intelligence. We can only trust in God Almighty. Of course, we need armies. We need political allegiances and alliances, but we cannot rely on them. We cannot put our trust in them. In God we trust. So it says on our money, had the genius of our founding fathers in this great United States of America. The Talmud also says that somebody who reads the Megillah of Esther backwards has not fulfilled his obligation. Our sages explain this peculiar instruction doesn't mean that somebody who's reading the Megillah backwards, like in rewind, but it means that somebody who reads the Megillah as a story of the ancient past, backwards, not a story of the present tense. Such a person has not fulfilled his obligation. Friends, we need today to realize that the story of Purim is in fact the story of our nation, of our people. This is not just something that happened way back then. This is something that is real. This is something that is happening right now, and we have no choice but to turn to God Almighty. I find it very telling that in the Prime Minister's office today, there was footage released of a high-level security consultation during this Operation Roaring Lion, showing Shin Bet chief, that's the Israeli CIA equivalent, Shin Bet chief David Sini sitting there with a yarmulke in front of the top brass of the Israeli political and military leadership, and he places a book on the discussion table. That book, clearly visible, is a book called Manot HaLevi by Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz. The Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz lived in the 16th century in the north of Israel, in Tzfat. He's most famous for his composition of Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala, Come My Beloved to Greet the Bride, the song that we sing in shuls around the world on a Friday night. But this book, Manot HaLevi by Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz, is a commentary on the story of Purim. Can you imagine how beautiful that is? How faith meets fortitude. When on the table of the military, political leadership, intelligence leadership of Israel, they have a book about the story of Esther, a book which tells that this is not only about physical and military might, but this is also about the spiritual might. We need the miracles of Purim in order to be able to persevere, in order to be able to survive. Friends, today we have to make that decision to move away from enjoying the feasts of the political support that we think that we're experiencing. The war after October 7th taught us that the college campuses and the universities where we sank billions of dollars in donations was worthless. That European countries and Western countries that so-called were civilized were hardly able to stand with Israel. Today we learn that our friends are few and far between. A friend in need is a friend indeed. Today we know that we have no one else to turn to but our Father in heaven. Let's do this. These are biblical times. The choice you make tonight, today, in your own heart will change the winds of war as it did back then 2,200 years ago. So too it will do today. Whether the missile misses its target in Israel, or God forbid, the opposite. Whether the missile in Iran will hit its destined target, or God forbid if it misses, depends on the choices you bear in your heart today, because you matter. You are not just a bystander, a spectator in this war. Each and every one of us are active participants in the theater of war. It is our choices, it is our words, it is our actions, it is our thoughts that will change the tide of this war, just as it did in the Purim story. That is what the Talmud is telling us, that someone who reads the Megillah backwards has not fulfilled their obligation. Let's look at this year's Purim that's celebrated like never before, realizing that this is not a story of the ancient past. This is a story of the present tense. And like then we experience miracles and wonders beyond our wildest dreams and expectations. We will emerge from this war, from Operation Rising Lion, with the ultimate victory of it all, with the coming of the Mashiach, when the world will experience higher consciousness and peace will reign throughout all the world, the purpose for which the world was ultimately created. That is happening now. The power is in your hands.